Thanks for coming out this evening. I'm Kyle Cleveland with the Institute of Contemporary Asian Studies. I've really been looking forward to this event. This event really had its conception back in October when Charles Casto, one of our speakers, had visited for some lectures and consulting and met with one of our other speakers, Kurokawa Kiyoshi, in which they talked about some of the issues that they will address today in their remarks. Both of them have the experience and the authority, I think, to speak very deeply into some of these issues that will be addressed today. The good news is that they're speaking today. We'll be able to learn from their experience and their knowledge on these issues. The bad news is that Anagawa Takumi has canceled. We just learned this today at about 4 p.m. Apparently he's got food poisoning, and it's not good. So that's very unfortunate because we were looking forward to having this dialogue next year. I can draw your attention to, actually, could you hit the lights there? This is the lecture that Anagawa-san gave at the Credit Suisse Bank in Europe, and I think that this lecture, which is online on YouTube, basically comprises what he might have talked about today, more or less. So if you would like to learn what his thinking is on these issues, you might have a look for that. This is readily available up on YouTube. Our other speakers today. First is Kurokawa Kiyoshi. It would take me 10 minutes to read his background and his profile. This is a person who was named one of the 100 most influential people in the world by Time magazine about a year ago. And he's also foreign policy, actually, so thank you for correcting me. He is a recipient of the Order of Purple from the government of Japan for excellence in academic achievement. He is a professor and also a medical doctor. He was chairman of the Health and Global Policy Institute and a fellow right now at the Graduate Institute for Policy Studies and professor emeritus from the University of Tokyo. He's had many governmental responsibilities and various leadership roles. And for this particular event, he is quite knowledgeable because he was the director of the National Diet of Japan Fukushima Nuclear Accident Independent Investigation Commission. This is the 400-page, really definitive report on this that involved well over 1,000 interviews with primary sources involved in the accident. And he's a person who has spent quite literally hundreds of hours dealing with this issue, much of which is involving principal actors who were involved with the Daiichi accident. Alongside Kurokawa-san tonight is Charles Casto. Chuck is a former administrator for the Nuclear Regulatory Commission in the United States. He was a plant operator at the Browns Ferry site in Alabama. And thereafter, he had various administrative roles. Chuck was the head of the main liaison for the American government for the nuclear crisis here back when the accident happened in 2011. He lived in Japan, stayed in Japan for some 11 months dealing with that. He had a group of about 16 to 20 people here in Tokyo and another 200 more people back in the United States with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, working on a daily, I'm sure hourly basis from Ambassador Ruse, the U.S. State Department, and also coordinating with Prime Minister Khan and his cabinet. Thereafter, Chuck was named the regional administrator for the Nuclear Regulatory Commission in charge of some 8 states in the United States. And at the time of the accident, was the director of safety inspection for the, or safety construction for the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, and has some 37 years of experience dealing with the nuclear industry. So these generally are not only knowledgeable authorities, but I think these are historic figures in this accident. And I think they'll have a lot to teach us tonight. So first of all, Kurokawa will speak and then Casto. They'll speak for 15 or 20 minutes. We'll have an extended Q&A. And when we have that Q&A, we'll move a microphone to the middle of the room. And if you could come up and speak into the mic because we're recording this. Understand that by participating in that, you're basically conceding that you will allow yourself to be video recorded, and this will be broadcast or published on the Kentucky University YouTube channel. So if you could please cooperate with that. So for now, if we could Invite Kurokawa-san for the questions.
Thank you for coming, and also thank you for inviting me to this occasion. It's a very attentive and interested audience. And so I'd like to share with some of my thoughts, and this is already 4 years since this accident. You remember? I'd like to have start with some of the points to share with you what kind of world we are living and we are heading to. This happened all last 14 years or so. That's the first major event which happened, the first event in the century. Everybody remembers that because it's the first big event in this century, but also you remember this is my first birthday of this century. All right, next. You know that this become a wider public knowledge because the access to TV and all the things, you know, experts knew it, but that's become a wider knowledge in the global community. Right? Next. Next. Oh, am I supposed to do it? No, maybe I could do that.
No, I can do it. Please speak a little question.
All right. This has been there, but this again become a wider public knowledge. One reason or another. Maybe many tourism on TV, live flat TV and camera, and also live in color TV, and realize this is the thing. And this is over the last 30 years showing the North Pole, right? Over 30 years we are losing a lot of things, and these are changing the way you behave and live and think and communicate. That wiki. You remember, I think, what happened in the first day of year 2000. We are struggling about the possibility of the 2000 issues. I was in the sort of Tokai University, so that we are staying on alert in the hospital, but nothing happened. That was that only 14 years ago. You remember? Big change. How you communicate your laptop at that time. Telephone line, very slow, right? But now we have been everybody carrying Wi-Fi, wireless, that technology, right? So that's due to all these crazy people, right? Now this is already widening sort of global income disparity. Entire income has been generated, but disparity is widening. And remember, this is Arab Spring when this happened. That was the December 17th of year 2010, which is only 3 months ahead of this Tohoku disaster. So that's only 4 years ago. Now then this happened 3 months later, and this happens as a consequence of this huge earthquake and tsunami. Then this is happening, spreading out to northern part of Africa. Libya is gone, Egypt is paralyzed, therefore Sinai Peninsula become a playground of maybe some extreme this or that, maybe camping site or something. Nobody knows this, and Libya and Tripoli is much better, but see what happened. And also Middle East. That's only 4 years ago that happened. And these guys become a weapon of mass destruction. What a victim of these kids. Terrible. Now this is a typhoon Haiyan in Philippines. Water climate change, which we never seen that of magnitude. They hit this a few months ago again in the same area. And now that happened Crimea. And you remember this Nigeria, like 200 boarding school girls are abducted, gone somewhere. And that happened in the Southeast Sea, Asian Sea in China, Vietnam, and this is ISIL or whatever that is, that's happening. All of a sudden, that's happening. And now, many Japanese, I thought maybe not Japanese here, but many Japanese thought this may be something else, but now that's, all of a sudden we realize, many Japanese acutely become aware, we are part of it. Now this is Ebola. Also that had been ignored for many years because Ebola was discovered 38 years ago in Zaire. At that time, Congo, even before HIV/AIDS was discovered. And in fact, when this was discovered, 1978, but first HIV/AIDS patient we have seen this patient in 1981 in California. Many patients are somehow obscurely common background is white gay. We are not so sure. We are puzzled why this guy is immunosuppressed. So we just wonder what happened with this guy. All of a sudden, the state of California had a research grant of $6 million, and then all of a sudden, many Americans begin to realize this is our thing. But Ebola was this problem.
Could you speak into the microphone?
Yeah, because this was not our thing, something distant. But now globalization, Ebola become a big thing, right? All of a sudden we recognize this is our thing. All right, so the globalization. What happened at the end of Cold War, perhaps the same year, HTTP and it came into the marketplace free of charge, and www came into the marketplace in 1991. All of a sudden we become connected and Wi-Fi access become much easier. Many technology, digital technology makes it much easier to have access, iPhone, all those things. And globalization led to interdependent economy, communication, politics, hyper-connected, all of a sudden, very acutely, and all of a sudden the world become fragmented and become very fragile. Why is it? We have to think about it. This is happening over the last only 10 years. So these are perhaps boiled down to maybe two things. Rapid progressing science and technology over the last 100 years, and this, look at this red curve, is a rapid explosion of human population. This is around 1900, over 100 years, like 1.6 billion to now more than 6 billion. So explosion of human population on this planet Earth with hyperconnectivity. Widening income disparity, so 99% become an issue, and unfortunately, more than 50% of this 99% see the real world on video, and or maybe some visual image, which many become frustrated without any reasoning. They start connecting, short messaging, tweet, or whatever happened, allow spring everything happened. Okay. So Fukushima nuclear accident. This is one of the typical black swan events. You don't want to see, you don't want to recognize the existence of such big risks, but somehow many big, all these black swan events are likely to happen anytime. So somehow many black swan events may happen. So various investigations, Fukushima accident was such a big issue. Why this is such a big issue? Within first week of this accident, everybody watched on TV, video, maybe website, and everybody become recognized that somehow Japanese authority are not telling all the truth, but somehow hiding, or this, or just idiots, I don't know. And that's sort of all of a sudden losing trust. Why this? This is a big issue, right? Because right now there are more than 440 nuclear plants in operation in the world. About 70% of nuclear plants is under construction. If anything happened, they would ask the Japanese government, what's happened, what you have done. Can they respond? This is in the middle of this Arab Spring, right? So there is many investigation, many independent official publication, and then 9 months later, NICE, National Dietary Nuclear Accident Independent Investigation Commission, that's what we say NICE as our abbreviation. So many reports came. So, but I think that interestingly, NICE, GOJP, you can see the entire text and video on online, which is a good thing at this time. And also English translator, English version of entire text can be also seen with 20 committee meeting completely open online and welcoming anybody, even Nikonama too, so open to the public and press, and online with simultaneous English translation, so you can see the response of many leaders in response to our question, which we are not professional, so our question is very naive. but see how Japanese elite tend to become very forgetful in a very key question. So that's your judgment, not our judgment. And English translation, open press briefing, and many press identify themselves and ask sometimes very good questions, sometimes such a nonsense question. So you can judge that. So that's the sort of fun time. And this is amazing thing. This is the first time in the history of constitutional democratic Japan. What do you think? I had a meeting with David Pilling, who was the head of Financial Times Tokyo office from year 2002 to 2008. And also, I have been invited to speak at this thing. This is the first time in the history of constitutional democratic Japan. And everybody said, really? Unbelievable. But many Japanese, if you are Japanese and think this is normal, first time is not a surprise. Strange. Who govern? Because this is the foundation of democracy, in my view. Three branches of government have to monitor each other to suppress each other's power. That is the three branches of government have to be independent and operating one another, suppressing each other's power. This is the first time in history. So that's my message to the Japanese establishment. Everybody said, first time? Unbelievable. That was an ordinary question in any mature democracy. All right. So Fukushima Commission's report. Volunteer college student, after they read this through, which is about 600 pages, who read this? English or Japanese? Not many, right? So that these students read through it and built entire sort of message into 6-part video, totaling just 17 minutes. I show you a few things, maybe number 2 or 3. So night, net, and English students. Remember night, and then Google it. All right. Number 3. Okay. So I'm not going to show you everything. All right. Let's see what they say.
Actors at the time of the accident. First, let's take a look at how energy is produced inside a nuclear reactor. A nuclear reactor is like a huge kettle. Water is boiled to generate steam, which activates turbines that generate electricity. Nuclear plants rely on nuclear energy instead of fire to boil water. The energy inside a nuclear reactor like the ones at Fukushima Daiichi is so great it can evaporate 700 kettles of water in just 1 second. Nuclear energy is generated by splitting atoms of uranium in a process called nuclear fission. 95% of that energy is kinetic, while the remaining 5% is radioactive. Kinetic energy can be instantly converted into electricity with a turbine. In case of an emergency, this process can be stopped immediately. But radioactive energy is the result of a chemical reaction that cannot be stopped. It continues generating heat. That's why nuclear reactors need to be constantly cooled with significant amounts of water. If nuclear fuel is no longer cooled, its radioactive energy becomes uncontrollable. Steam reacts with materials covering the fuel rods and produces hydrogen inside the reactor. To prevent an excessive accumulation of hydrogen, the reactors need to be opened to allow some of the gas to escape. This process is called venting. Failure to carry out this operation can trigger a violent explosion. The amount of radioactive substances in 1 ton of spent nuclear fuel is so great that if it were diluted in 10 million Olympic swimming pools, the water would still be undrinkable 1,000 years from now. For years, TEPCO and regulators claimed nuclear plants were safe from accidents because of the 3-way safety system of shutdown, cooling, and containment. But Fukushima Daiichi lost all its power supply, and with it the ability to keep the reactors cool and free of hydrogen. Had contingency plans taken into account a possible accident and included detailed evacuation plans, the impact of the crisis could have been lessened. Luckily, 2 other nuclear plants in the area, Onagawa and Tokai Daini, did not lose the power supply. But the situation could have been much worse under different weather and tidal conditions. Nuclear reactors produce tremendous amounts of energy, and nuclear accidents result in equally tremendous consequences.
Maybe one more? Maybe 5 or 6? 5. Yeah. Yeah.
So number 5, you said?
Right.
Could the damage have been contained? People who were forced to evacuate their homes suffered the gravest consequences of the nuclear accident. What could have been done to ease their evacuation? As part of its investigation, the Commission organized town meetings and heard from more than 400 evacuees. It conducted surveys on more than 10,000 people affected by the crisis. The Commission examined the accident from different points of view. It identified 3 outstanding problems. Number 1, authorities failed to keep residents informed about the accident and the spread of radiation. Many were unaware a nuclear accident had occurred until they were ordered to evacuate. Others left important belongings behind, thinking they would be able to return in a few days. Even though the situation was life-threatening, the evacuation was delayed in most municipalities. Problem number 2, authorities kept redefining the extent of evacuation zones. This forced residents to move from one place to the next, in some cases as many as 6 times. 60 people died during or immediately after the evacuation. They were mainly hospital patients and elderly residents from nursing homes. Residents who were ordered to stay indoors suffered tremendously from a lack of food and transportation. Those living outside a 30-kilometer perimeter from the plant were told that evacuating was for them to decide, but much of the information they depended on to understand the risks to their health and safety was a mix of rumors and hearsay. The third problem identified by the investigation was the uselessness of existing evacuation plans and drills. They failed to anticipate the simultaneous occurrence of an earthquake, a tsunami, and a nuclear accident. The scale of the crisis was far beyond anything expected. Authorities did identify potential threats before the disaster, but nuclear regulators opposed safety drills on the basis they'd be too difficult to organize. A system was in place to predict the spread of radioactivity. To be effective, it required data from a network of monitoring stations. But central and local authorities had neglected to install the proper equipment and couldn't retrieve the data. As a result, the system failed to keep track of the situation and proved useless. Residents not only lost valuable possessions in the wake of the evacuation, they lost their quality of life. Had contingency plans been based on worst-case scenarios, the damage from the disaster could have been minimized.
Thank you. That's a nice piece of thing, and I think many high school students have become aware of this video and sharing this with now Red Cross is partnering with them and spreading out what they could do individually, learning and spreading out. In fact, International Red Cross invited this high school student in Fukushima a few months ago, yes. And so that I think they like to do what they can each do to change their mindset and learn from this accident. That's a nice thing. The core message of this night was not technicality, although we are responding to the mandate given by the legislative arm. But the core message, this was due to regulatory capture, which is an economical hypothesis advanced by Professor George Stigler of University of Chicago professor who received a Nobel Prize in economics by advancing this regulatory capture. This is in essence government failed to implement the necessary regulatory sort of rules and laws to prevent the public or people, but rather captured by the institution or organization which they're supposed to regulate. So this is a kind of failure of the government. In fact, Japanese authority knew about defense in depth, which is a recommendation by IAEA based on the many small and big accidents, but they have failed to implement defense in depth. And then also, this is due in our interpretation part to groupthink of Japanese institution and lack of sense of obligation to dissent in any group and also institution, and also lack of sense of accountability. Perhaps you know you have been in Japan, so that accountability, what accountability means, but I think this is translated in Japanese language and perhaps official endorsement by some institution, government, responsibility to translate. 説明責任. So, what the idiots, right?
Kurokawa, can you get behind the lines with the lights? Because he can't.
Absolutely. All right. So the lesson learned from the name. Apparent causes are insufficient defense in depth because they assume there's no severe accident will happen. Therefore, there's no need to implement some policy how to evacuate people and all the things. And that's IAEA executive knew about it. But I think whenever they asked Japanese government agencies, they said, well, we suppose there's no accident in Japan. I mean, that's kind of thing. All of a sudden they realize, I think that's happened. And no systematic knowledge management transfer because they assume nothing happens, and lack of safety consciousness and regulatory and academic capture. So some part of academia and media have been captured too. And root causes, now, however, this is only a tip of iceberg in our view, and our report suggests that root causes are poor learning and questioning attitude among many Japanese and particular establishments, including media, and poorly developed safety culture and complacency and mindset, and quote unquote, and closed monoculture community. So that's leading to the group thing. And by the way, this mindset has been a keyword, quote unquote, of certain major reports such as 3 Mile Island, mindset, and also space shuttle challenger issue, mindset of managers, and mindset of engineers. All right, now since 4 years after that, what happened? Nurturing new safety culture became one of the keywords in nuclear regulation and operation in the world, because that's happened in Japan. Japan gained the credibility and trust of the world community by what? Anime? Manga? No, come on. What earned the Japanese credibility over the last 150 years?
Quality control.
Quality control, that's one thing. What else? Usually considered perhaps reasonably good quality of science and technology, engineering and industrial manufacturing products are good. I mean, that's the Japanese credibility, but that happened in Japan. Therefore, many countries are surprised within that year. Germany, Switzerland, and Italy have decided to phase out nuclear energy, right? That means people of that country and the leadership. So that also changed the nuclear power sort of safety culture, because that's happened in Japan. And the report says that there's some cultural element into that. Now, recently, U.S. Government Accountability Office, which is under the Congress, published a report in March this year about nuclear safety culture, what each country learned from Fukushima accident. They cited many of our reports, and that was March. And next month, first time in IAEA's history, they had a special 3-day workshop on nuclear safety and national culture. And of course I was not invited. Of course I was not informed, but like 3 Japanese representations. Yeah, but I think because of this report, many sort of those who are there knew about my report, so they sent me an email. So they asked, why Dr. Kurokawa is not here to the Japanese delegate? They are sort of frozen, right? That's the order of somebody else. So that is a dangerous thing of this connected world. Now, U.S. National Academy, also Nuclear Regulatory Commission ordered, I think, asked National Research Council, that's National Academy of Science in the United States, asked an independent investigation of Fukushima accident in this technological engineering aspect for 2 years. It started in August of year 2012. That means right after we submitted our reports to the government or the legislators. So that this was chaired by Norman Newrider, perhaps Norm knows that, Norm Wilson knows that. But I think he was chair, so he sent me, he knew we knew each other, so he sent me email that your report was just great, just like you, very straight and clear. But then he started to become a chair, and this was submitted 2 years commission. So this was submitted in not August, but July of this last year, and then they had a briefing session to the Japanese government in August. And they have a sort of arrangement of appointments through Japanese embassy in Washington, D.C., I'm sure. So I was out. I was not included in the briefing, but Norman Newrider knew that. He flew by himself the day earlier and just we met. So that kind of a thing is strange. So these are the nurturing nuclear safety culture. Every country wants to learn what to do and this and that, but I think all these response, we are out. So that's the mindset of Japanese governance. So in my view, so that's what they did. So responsibility of Japan in the world. Our reports are just active, open-minded, bi and multilateral communication with international partners, because lessons have to be shared and learned and shared, and lessons learned and shared, collective actions. The commissioning process, how to do it. Nobody knows. Why don't we act more like open access and all the things? And accumulating contaminated water, what are we going to do? There's an open bid, and nobody knows. About 750 applications and proposals came in, but have to be more open process to build up a policy. New nuclear safety agency created, but do you see any significant change? That's another thing. Everybody is worried about this thing as a matter of future perspective reflecting Fukushima nuclear accident. And then Japan, beauty of the world. How we are viewed positive, stable business operation, maybe not much adapting, but hard-working engineers, well-trained operators, skillful technicians, highly educated public, that's sort of highly valued, negative, unclear decision-making process, and isolated or closed from international community, even the academic community, and governance is strong loyalty, weak leadership, lack of sense of accountability, and consensus with top-down decisions. So restoring trust. And we suggest transparency and partnership. The attitude is very important. The governance, independence, best science-based and global world and communication, the transparency of the process and public engagement will be a very important process of evaluating before we starting this nuclear plant. Dialogue of partnership with world regulators, standardization of regulation, partnership with world regulators and human resource development and professionals. That's very important with world partners. And sharing experiences and transparency and openness and international collaboration, we are one of the key elements for regaining the trust so that we could restart and make nuclear safety for sure. So these are my perception of Japanese institution, sort of mindset. Japan ordered by the structure, and most others ordered by the function. And if I ask many Japanese authorities and Japanese public, this is the view of Japan, and they see that. And if I ask Japanese, what is this? And many Japanese would say, Prime Minister? Perhaps not. Maybe Kasumigaseki. So if they say Kasumigaseki, I click this and same thing appears. What do you think? What is this? Many Japanese would think Minister of Finance. And if I push this thing again, who is this? Jimujikan, of course, right? And so that means if you want to become a Jimujikan, what do you do? You study hard, go to University of Tokyo Law School, and one admission, that's it, they go through. So that means every 2 years they rotate, so that they avoid any sort of this and that. That's what it is. That's a perception by the greater public. So that's is one of the root cause of this one. Accountability, lack of sense of accountability, groupthink, and holiness, no diversity, no obligation to dissent. So that is the root cause of this accident. That's our report. Thank you.
Thank you, Kurokawa-san. And now Chuck will speak.
So let me give this microphone to anyone who wants to follow Dr. Kurokawa. All right, if you would like to follow him, you're welcome to the microphone. So what I thought, and I think I'll follow up with some of Dr. Kurokawa's points and talk about what I plan to talk about is a little bit about the crisis itself and the way we lead crisis. A little bit about what I call the evolution of the accident. How did it really evolve? And I'll talk about some details about that from the site, what happened to Daiichi, what happened to Daini, and then the aftermath of the accident in terms of policy and regulation. And then I'll close it up. And I agree a great deal with. I'm trying to kill a little bit of time here while kind of pulls this video up, but what I want to show you is, if there's some volume on that, and I want to show you the hostile nature of Japan in terms of the, what you're going to see here, somebody kill these lights right here.
Nice.
Okay. You get your volume on that. So what you're seeing here is, these are earthquakes around Japan. This is January 13th, I think it is, of 2011. Okay? These are, and the circles give you the magnitude of the earthquake. And the circles give you the magnitude of the earthquake, and this line will give you the depth of it. And there's some really cool sound on here if we could get it to come up, but it's not coming up. I could make a little sound, but it's not nearly as good. So you can see, look at the natural activity of earthquakes around the Japan Trench in the fall. This is February, hold on, let's freeze that for just a second. I don't want to get into March before.
Yeah, I think we'll be able to get some.
February. Right.
Be sure you don't pull up some bad video.
You mean of the nuclear explosions?
Yeah. Where'd it go?
It's this one, I just can't scroll up.
Okay. Yeah, exactly.
Get this out. It doesn't. Go back. Go back.
Okay.
Don't worry about it. Don't worry.
Put a microphone to the speaker on the computer and live it.
Right.
Okay, so here's February 9th. Okay, normal activity. This thing doesn't seem like it's
Technology. We just can't do both. We can't do both.
okay.
Mike's working.
So there's the 22nd of February, 24th I think it is. Normal. Now look at the earthquake starting to populate. There. Okay. There's March 11th. Look down at the left corner, you see the accumulation of aftershocks up to 3,000 right there in the corner. So let's go back and look at that again because it's just exciting.
Okay.
So there's March 1st. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. And then the aftershocks. I think around the 10th of April or something comes to 7. Remember that one? I was here then. It was a pretty healthy aftershock. It was actually an earthquake, right? Somewhere in there it happens again. There it is. Around the 11th of April, almost exactly a month later, it came that 7. So you can see how dynamic Japan is. It's amazing when you see that. Go ahead and pop the lights on. So when we think about siting nuclear plants, I think we have to think really hard and do some analysis and design. So I'll just jump in. I see the accident a little differently. It's okay if I sit down?
Sure.
Let's talk about the evolution of the accident. Maybe talk about the evolution of the Chernobyl accident. You know, when the Soviet Union sited their reactors, you know, the Ukraine is probably not a place that you really want a heat machine to operate. And it was very remote. They had to build, not only to build the reactor there, no one lived there, so they had to build a city around it. All right, and there was a lot, it was very isolated. It was not close to Moscow, it was not close to other reactors, very isolated. So the operators there really, there was very little learning going on in Chernobyl. And there was a lot of, honestly, there was a lot of complacency in Chernobyl. And the best and the brightest, you know, if you're the best engineer in Moscow University, you want to go to the upper Ukraine and work at a nuclear reactor. So you're not drawing the best and the brightest people, right? So the siting, the people, the whole social environment was set up, you know, in sort of the path dependence model of failure. So it really started, the Chernobyl accident really started when they sited the nuclear plant where they put it. And in my mind, this is I either know too much or too little. I'm still trying to figure out what that is. Which one? That's a joke you can laugh at. But you know, when I look at the Fukushima accident, you know, I go back to 1900 in Japan. And you know, in the 1900s in Japan, there were 150 or so, over 100 utilities producing electricity. Anybody who could, you know, boil water could produce electricity and put it on a generator, put it on the grid. And after the war, I wonder who caused this problem. After the war, it was consolidated to about 9 or 10 utilities, and there was deliberately no competition between the utilities, right? No competition. You got two different grids, so you can't compete. The 250 cycle and the 60 cycle grid, it was all set up that everybody had carved out certain territories, you know. So there's a lack of competition right after the war. And then we decide to nuclearize Japan with nuclear plants. So what would your question be if you're going to put a nuclear plant somewhere in Japan? I guess what would come up in your head is, where's the safest place to put a nuclear plant? You know, that would come across my mind. I don't know about you, but if I'm thinking about nuclear power, I'd say, where was a safe place to put it? Well, that really wasn't in the equation. What was in the equation became more of, where can we put it? All right? And coincidentally, there's a lot of infrastructure around old imperial military bases. Seems like a good place to put an industrial machine, abandoned military. So when you look at that, and then the lack of competition, so you've got this structure of lack of competition. The competition, in my mind, drives excellence for companies. If you don't have competition, you're probably going to decline. You're probably going to go out of the market. Competition, in my mind, as a capitalist, is a good thing. If you remember, how many of y'all know about the Triple Crown? You know what that is, a horse race? You win 3 of them, Kentucky Derby and a couple others. I don't know what they are. Preakness and Belmont, yeah. So when Secretariat won, she won that triple. Remember that movie? That was an awesome movie. So when she won, she broke like the world record. That horse really ran his butt off, right? So what happened to the other 4 horses that come in behind her? What did they do? They all broke the track record. All of them. So they had 5 track records broken, something like 4 or 5 track records broken because of the Secretariat, right? The other horses said, "Man, look at this horse run," right? And I don't know if they said that. Maybe they thought that. I don't know. Maybe horses think like that. I don't know. But they were like, "Wow, this horse is really fast. I better run." And it makes us all better, right? It makes us all better. So you got this lack of competition. You've got this structure set up. The regulatory capture, as Dr. Kurokawa talked about, the regulatory capture kind of got set up. TEPCO was the big utility, and then it had heavy influence in Tokyo because it was Tokyo's power supply. So TEPCO's got heavy, and TEPCO really wasn't an operating company. They were an umbrella company to operate that mainly used vendors and support organizations. They're not really an operating company. So when you come to a crisis, then it's hard to, at that point, become an operating company turn on a dime. So that became very difficult. So my point is, I think I'll have to look the tape over again and see if I made a point. But the point is that these accidents start many years before they really happen. It's a system. A system, and I may have talked about this before, but it's a system failure. It's an imbalance of power. As Dr. Kurokawa said, it's imbalance of power, responsibility, and accountability. So you have that triad of accountability, responsibility, and authority, power. In a healthy system, the government has power over whether the plant operates or not. They have power, they have a regulator, they have laws, and they have power. The responsibility for safety in a healthy system should be, the utility should be responsible for safety. They operate the plant. And then me as a regulator for almost 3 decades, I understood that the primary responsibility for safety rests with the operator. The operator is there every day with thousands of people, and they have permission from the government to operate, and they need to, by law, operate the plant safely. So they have the responsibility, and if they don't, then we should hold them accountable for not operating. So you got this balance between these 3 concepts: power, authority, and responsibility. And what happens when you have an accident, like 3 Mile Island? What happened to 3 Mile Island is that was actually not a design issue, it was a human issue. It was lack of training of operators that caused 3 Mile Island, not necessarily a design issue, although design played a role. But it was had a lot to do with lack of accountability for people on the accountability side. So after 3 Mile Island, what does the United States do? Well, you take all the accountability and responsibility away from the operator because they've violated your trust. So we can't trust them anymore. So we'll take the keys away from them. They're like little kids. We'll take the keys away from the car from them, and we'll hold them, right? So the government will hold all the responsibility, all the authority, and all the accountability, right? So you think that's a healthy process? Because then what happens is, the power thing creeps in, and people make stupid decisions, like we did. After 3 Mile Island, we issued a thing called New Reg 0737, which was a regulation that had contained thousands of new requirements. Most of them were nonsensical. They had no cost-benefit analysis done to them. We just thought, the tougher we are, the safer the reactor is. Well, we learned after 3 Mile Island, years after 3 Mile Island, that these regulations were actually counterproductive to safety. That just piling on more regulation doesn't add safety to it. There needs to be wisdom brought into the equation, not just demands. So we spent the next 20 years, took us a long time, took the next 20 years to put the pendulum back in the middle and rebalance the equation and put responsibility and accountability back in the hands of the utility, and the government kept power. Which in a balanced system, that's probably the best equation. Now, I guess my concern with Japan is they did exactly the same thing, which is understandable, right? The government put all the responsibility and accountability and authority in the NRA. The NRA gets to make all the decisions. Well, guess what the safest reactor is? A shut-down reactor, right? That's the safest. So you have to have a line of what is the risk you're willing to accept. Every technology that we have in our life has a risk to it. So you have to decide how much risk are we willing to accept as a nation. What's the level of risk? And the government, the Diet, the administration needs to establish that line in consultation with the regulated community, the regulator, and the people primarily. So you have to have this national dialogue. And we had that national dialogue in the United States, and we amended the Atomic Energy Act after 3 Mile Island, and it was a concept called reasonable assurance of adequate protection. Now that sounds pretty vague, reasonable assurance of adequate protection, but over the years, basically it said, you got to do a cost-benefit analysis, and over the years, the courts better define reasonable assurance. And now we have a legal process of what does reasonable assurance mean. So that's a line, reasonable assurance of adequate protection is a line we drew in consultation with all the stakeholders and said this is the acceptable risk for nuclear power. Right? And so that conversation, I've said that before here, that conversation needs to happen and rebalance, and the government has to take their part of that responsibility. You can't just hand it over to the regulator. If you just hand that over to the regulator, power it over to the regulator, then the bureaucrats in that agency, or in any agency, right? I'm not criticizing the NRA, it happens in any agency. They're afraid to take on any risk because they're afraid if there's an accident, somebody's going to come knocking at my door and take my car away from me, or take my house away from me, or put me in jail or something. So they don't want to take any risk because they're afraid of being held accountable. So who really should do that are the politicians, right? The politicians are the ones that should take that on, as we did in the United States. And in addition, the regulator, so here's another problem that sort of the international community has imposed on Japan, or not imposed, have suggested to the Japanese, and we've misinterpreted. The international community comes into Japan and says, your regulator has to be independent, strongly independent regulator. That's a healthy balance. Well, that's a problem, okay? Because people misinterpret what an independent regulator. I was a regulator for 30 years. People misinterpret what an independent regulator is. An independent regulator doesn't mean an isolated regulator. Independence doesn't mean isolation. Okay? So they need to have somebody oversee them and tell them, this is the line we've drawn. This is the acceptable risk. So in the United States, for instance, Congress has drawn the line, reasonable assurance of adequate protection. And they've told the regulator, regulate, who's doing that? That's just natural.
That's good.
Hey, it's a video, huh?
Yeah.
Awesome, it came on. It came on.
That, yeah, I recognize.
Okay, I got to wrap up here, right? Where's Kyle? He's probably having a heart attack. So, where was I at? What did I say? I wasn't listening to myself. So you got to, every agency has to have some oversight, right? Or they do crazy things, right? Every government agency needs oversight. That's a healthy balance. You can't just, the politicians can't just say, well, that's the regulator's responsibility. I had no responsibility, right? They're giving up their responsibility when they do that. So they need oversight too. If the NRC in the United States does something really stupid, guess what happens? Congress calls them up on Capitol Hill and they start poking their finger at them and bringing them up to a hearing and saying, you're doing stupid things, right? And quit doing that, right? And they may or may not quit doing it, but they get drugged out in the public. And if Congress really gets mad, then they'll amend their budget and say, well, you know, through the budget they'll say, you can't, remember we tried to move an office one time in Chattanooga, Tennessee. It was a training center, it had about, I don't know, 50 employees or something like that. And the NRC said, we're going to close that office because it's stupid to have it there with 50 people. We've got a building of 3,000 people in Rockville, Maryland. Doesn't make any sense to have this building in Chattanooga. We're going to get rid of it. Congress said, the congressman from that district said, they're not killing 50 jobs in my district. What I do this time. You guys in this technology. Battery died. So they actually put in our budget, if you move that office, you don't get a budget next year. Okay? So every agency needs some kind of, we get it, you get it, so you got to have a balance, you got to have oversight. I probably could have said that a lot faster.
Cut to the chase.
What's that?
Cut to the chase.
Yeah, I could have said that really faster, couldn't I? So let's stop with the evolution of accident. I want to talk a little bit about Daiichi and Daini and what happened there. The challenge, so I talked about the evolution, we talked about the evolution of accident through the 1900s and to now. And then the day of the accident, the time of the accident. Some of the biggest challenges were that the site Daiichi became very isolated, right? We know that. The Fukushima 50, which was actually like 69 or something like that, they became very isolated, and not a lot of support to them was able to get to them. So they became very isolated. There wasn't much. Really, the fate of that reactor was probably destined from the tsunami. The operators worked diligently to try to limit the damage, but they worked very as hard as they could with what they had. Yoshida and the people there, and down at Daini, I mean, no one knew the story of Daini. Daini, they were desperately fighting to save that reactor, and Masuda, as a wonderful leader, saved, in my mind, saved those 4 reactors by rerouting some cables, 9 kilometers of cable with 200 people working diligently. So, I think that the operators at both sites did everything they could to mitigate the consequences of the accident. I always appreciate what they did, and I was with some of them yesterday and talked to them in more detail about what they went through and the emotions. You can imagine when you're facing death as they did, the emotions that go through that. And talking with them yesterday, it was interesting because even as they told their story again to me, the interpreters that were with me had a very difficult time getting through the story, and interpreting for me because they were breaking down. They were sobbing, the interpreters. So that tells you the desperation in the story of what happened to the operators there and what they went through and trying to do their best and working diligently to reduce the damage at that plant. So, me as an old operator, I can appreciate that. I operated three units just like Daiichi units 2, 3, and 4. I operated the same units in Alabama. So I can appreciate what they did, and I always respect them for what they did. So I'll wrap up there, and that gives us like an hour for questions. You think there's any questions in this group?
I think so.
I'm not sure. Let's see if they can. I get all the easy questions. Kurokawa gets all the hard ones. I was at over conference just before I came here. I was over there with the Nakamura, the Nobel Prize winner. He was sitting. He was sitting right in front of me, and I went through a discussion of Daiichi, and they asked, are there any questions? And I said, he can't ask any questions, right? Because he's going to have me calculate something about LEDs, But so he didn't ask me a question. I said, Dr. Nakamura, I need you to ask me a question seriously, because I want to put it on my resume that I answered a question for the Nobel Prize.
Everyone, as I mentioned earlier, if you could please come up to the microphone to ask your questions. And if you could please ask questions that end with a question mark, as opposed to...
Okay, my question is for Chuck Castro.
Hi.
And I think for me the most important thing that you said is, in any technology there's a risk, and so we have to decide the level of risk to be tolerated. So my question to you is, who gets to decide the level of risk tolerated? And in concrete terms, what is the best way to do this? For Japan.
Yeah.
Japan. And I don't think it's working that well in the U.S. either.
You're right. It doesn't work that well in the U.S., but it works fairly well. The decision has to be between the people and the politicians primarily. They have to decide what's the acceptable level of risk. The area under the curve, it's the tails that you have to worry about. The low probability, high consequence events are the ones that are really the toughest to try to draw the line on. So we have to clearly explain to the people what the risks are, what is the problem, what is the hazard, and talk to them openly about what the hazard is, how bad it could get, under what conditions, and have a dialogue with the people and come up with that line. Right now the line is 0. Right now the line is no, we will accept no risk. So there's something between no risk and 100% risk that there will be an accident, or in the United States it's reasonable assurance of adequate protection. I can't define it for the Japanese, but they need to, it's best if they define it for themselves with conversation with the people. People are the ones that are subject to the risk, so they need to have a voice. I don't know, that's not a clear answer. There's no magic. If there was a magical button, if there was a, believe me button, we would push it, and then we'd have it. We don't have it. It's an evolution. It takes time. This one's Kurokawa. That one was really hard.
You showed us this map with all the earthquakes at the beginning.
Yeah.
And you said the plants were not put in the best place where they should have been put. Is there a best place in Japan where you could
That's good. I don't think I said it exactly that way. I said I would have asked the question, where is the best place? I didn't say they were put in the, not put in the best place. I just said I would ask the question where is the best place? So you need to do that analysis. The wizards who do seismic analysis and tsunami analysis, they need to come up with the acceptable level of risk and decide where is the best place to site a nuclear plant in this country.
I'm going to use the bully pulpit here to follow up on that. In terms of the seismic assessment of the impact of earthquakes on the power plants, how do you feel about the way the NRA has done that, and is it safe to have nuclear reactors in a country that is this seismically active with earthquakes?
Well, I can't answer that question, but I'm not a seismic expert. I'm an operator. And in fact, I listened to a big seismic expert this week at Tokyo Tech go through this, and the science of seismology has evolved a lot, but it still has a long way to go. This earthquake this 9.0 surprised the seismologists. According to this gentleman, the scientist that I heard this week, we didn't, and that wasn't predicted, and it was outside the prediction zone, and it has to do with if the plate's less than 100 million years old, or somewhere around 100 million years old, we never thought that, the scientists who study that never thought that you could have a big earthquake because the seduction zone is very short. So they didn't think for 100 million years is a long time. So this zone, I'm getting out here where I don't know, I don't know what I'm talking about. But that zone where that plate is, the plate's not big enough. The seduction zone that's going under the other plate's not big enough. Theoretically, by the scientists say it wasn't big enough to have an earthquake that big. Well, this happened with a relatively young, what's considered a relatively young plate. So that really confused the seismologists. And I'm just telling you what I heard this week. That it really confused the seismologists, and the outcome of all that was, well, we can't predict if it's a 100 million year plate, around 100 million year plate, we don't have a good prediction technique. So that tells you something about, where you site a nuclear plant. And is there a place? I don't know the answer to that question.
Kurokawa, did you want to make a point about
Not really, but at least I think there's a great quote. I think also we put this quote, and also I get many times, this should be one of the quote. Accident happens. Whatever you like it or not, accident happens, right? If you know any accident which never happened, let us know. Machine breaks. If there's any machine which never broke, let us know. That's a fundamental issue, right?
Right.
And human makes errors, right?
Right, but there's a big
So these are the three parts I think we have to accept. Then what is the minimum risk and the consequences? We have to calculate, best science-based, and somebody have to make a decision. So these are the sort of standard issue. So I think that is the reason, let's see, I'm going forward or not, I'm not so sure. This is a very, very famous quote by Richard Feynman, who is a Nobel laureate in physics at Caltech, who was one of the commissioner of Space Shuttle Challenger issue, and he pointed out the Space Shuttle Challenger was 4 times successful launch and 5th time they failed. So the mindset of engineers think maybe once in 100 launch, there may be an accident may happen, but the manager thinks 1,000 times more, like 1 million times a year. So that kind of thing. So he said, he showed in the Congress by experiment, these O-rings in the low temperature that could break up. So that he said, for a successful technology, reality must take precedence over public relations, for nature cannot be fooled. So that is the principle, whatever you do. So there's no zero risk for whatever you do. So who make a decision? I mean, that's a process of sort of policy. So who develop policy and who make a decision in Japanese organization? That's my question. And if this is not a politician or bureaucracy, so that's sort of mindset of Japanese. I think if you have some trouble, you want to go to bureaucracy. That not you. But if you say vocally, most Japanese would sort of don't like your idea. So that's the reason. That's the reason my message to make a more healthy civil society. That's the sort of core message. So he said politician, but I'm not so sure in Japanese who develop policy and who execute this policy.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'd like to make this question kind of from the opposite side. Is it possible to build a nuclear power plant that would have actually survived it? In other words, if you could have known 10 years ahead of time, looked in the crystal ball and said, on that day, this is going to happen, and you had an open budget, is it actually possible to build a nuclear power plant that would have survived that and kept on running along?
Well, Onagawa. Maybe they didn't want to hear from me. The Onagawa, just a year before the accident at Onagawa nuclear plant, the engineers, they looked at the possibility of a tsunami of this magnitude, and the people there said, you know what, this might happen someday. So why don't we just make our wall higher. And just a year before March 11th, they finished the wall at Onagawa, and you all know what happened there, right? It ended up being a shelter for the people in the city of Onagawa that was wiped away by the tsunami. The nuclear plant became, so you can defend against that level of tsunami. It can be defended against. And you can defend against the seismic. You can defend against the seismic that you see here on this visualization chart. It's possible to defend against that. And now it's going to take a lot of money, but you can do it. You're like in charge or something. I don't know if you're like to ask questions or something.
Oh, wait, Mike.
I'm Rick Weisberg. Thank you both very much for an interesting presentation. Both of you have said that accountability is one of the key lacking features of the management and decision-making involved in nuclear power in Japan. But I don't really understand how can you imagine accountability being implemented? So Kurokawa sensei, that the report that your commission produced recommended that nobody be punished for bad decision-making. What does accountability mean in the context of Japan?
No, I think that was asked many times in the press briefings. But that means our sponsor is legislative arm. So we are making it open. So if there's any suspicion, judiciary arm or somebody else have to capture all the data in terms of whatever. We are not responsible for that, making somebody is responsible. That's always
I'm not saying that your commission should be making people accountable.
No.
But I'm just asking in a general sense in Japanese society, what would accountability look like?
No, that's what it is. So if you become a CEO, you are accountable to execute what you are supposed to do. How you do it, that's your problem. If you are not doing a good job and then outside board somebody kick him out. Is that the system in Japan? That was my question.
But then maybe the question is,
no, so
there's no accountability,
right?
We shouldn't have nuclear power here.
Well, that's a different thing. I mean, any decision. So who make a policy and who make a decision? As a formality, that has to be a cabinet or minister. But suppose each minister change every month. Is there any change in Japanese policy? That's my question. Who make a decision? That's what it is. And who are not making this election? That's the thing. That's the process. Is that major capture? So there's a many paper appeared after 9/11, after 3/11, says, major media PR agency of Kashmir State. Who wrote this? They are not salaryman journalists, real journalists. Right? So that means that is what the core message of David living his life, so his bending adversity. That Fukushima accident really exposed the weakness of Japanese sort of organization, the governance of Japan, which has been very successful in post-war and also post-Meiji era. But that's all of a sudden that's fragility. Who is making a decision? That's the same. And Warfare has been writing any map of Japanese power. Nobody is responsible for making any decision because every bureaucrats, whoever they have their post, and they just rotating off every 2 years.
I agree with him.
Well, my answer, I think, is that the Japanese taxpayers have been all held accountable. Right. We're in this already over $100 billion of our taxes because all the risks and the consequences have been socialized.
Right.
So it's been spread out among all of us, and in addition, we get to pay higher rates for our electricity. But my question is, based on your investigation, based on your knowledge, Chuck, about the America situation, what lessons are being ignored from the Fukushima accident? And back to Chuck's presentation, the workers you met, you said that they did their very best to mitigate. I'm sure they did try, but the 3 investigations, not the TEPCO investigation, but the other 3 investigations all pointed out the workers were not properly trained. Even Yoshida admitted he had no idea how to use the high-tech, special emergency systems. Right. So one wonders, Have they fixed those problems? Are the workers properly trained? Why are they rushing so quickly to try to restart reactors? Why is it that the government assures us that there will be no volcanoes near the Sendai plant down in Kagoshima, even though volcanologists say you can't predict there will be no volcanoes for the next 20 years. So I just wanted to wonder about how risk is being mitigated now and what lessons are being learned or ignored.
Well, you want to go first? I don't know. That's a really hard question. I don't know how. Cal, you told me there would be hard questions. All right? That was a lot of questions. So, but what I would, one of the things, one of the things I'd say with lessons being ignored, I don't think there's any lessons ignored. I think there are still lessons to learn, and there'll be lessons to learn for a long time in Fukushima. We're still, for me as a crisis leader person, interest in crisis leadership, study, research crisis leadership. That's an area where everyone, if that's an area where, and it's just not nuclear power. Let's look at ISIS. Let's look at Malaysia Air. When we look at how we're leading these Ebola, how we're leading these crises, we've got a long way to go on how to lead through a crisis. We've got a lot to learn. We need to standardize our processes and our communications and our terminology with all of these crises. And if we didn't do it well in the nuclear world is highly coupled. It's a very coupled world. They look out at each other, they do benchmarking, they do a lot of things. And if we didn't do crisis leadership well in the nuclear world, there's a whole lot of other areas where we can't do crisis leadership well, including Ebola in particular, and ISIS. So we still have a lot to learn with that. And as I said, I spent the last 2 days with operators from all the nuclear utilities in Japan and listened to their training and participated in their training for the last 2 days. And it's it's seriously something, I've done it, I've been part of that around the world. And it's some of the highest level of crisis training I've seen. They're doing a really good job with learning, and TEPCO's done a good job of changing their crisis leadership structure and how they do it. So we still have, the answer to that question, we still have a lot to learn. Not ignored, but a lot to wring out of the crisis. And the other question was something about volcanoes and all that. It comes down to the same thing. You got to have a conversation about and decide what policy you're going to have. Is that a level of risk you're going to accept or not accept? Volcanoes. You got to have those conversations and develop the policy. It's not a yes or no answer. You can defend against volcanoes. You can defend against that. It's just a matter of cost.
No, but that's the reason in general there's a sort of lack of culture of obligation to dissent is a very important element of any decision-making process. Corporation, bank, and bureaucracy, or even academics. Do you hear that's the normal culture in Japanese? Why it's not? Because seniority-based promotion. Once you're in Mitsubishi Bank, can you move to Sumitomo Bank in the middle of your career? Is that a no? If you do that, you stay with the institution. Once you get in METI, you assume you'll stay in the METI for the rest of your career, right? Is that a norm in other countries? So that's the mindset of Japanese, I think, sort of cultivate this is a common agenda. And they think this is the way. Why Japanese says, 帰国子女? Why 子女? Is there any Japanese say 子女? 帰国子女. 子供, women and children are equal and below men. I mean, that's a part of Japanese. So when you communicate in Japanese, that is taken for granted somehow. So once you're married, you remain as the rest of your career, not moving around, right? That's a norm of Japanese, somehow.
Well, what about the 1 million demonstrators in the summer of 2012? Is that they were forgetting their Japanese culture?
No, is that a lot of media coverage in Japan?
Fair amount.
Fair. No,
even on NHK.
No, that's what it is now.
So people were out there dissenting.
Right?
Yeah.
But is there maybe just highlighting this thing? No, that's the reason when that happened, I just all of a sudden changed my Twitter and following many journalists outside because Arab Spring has happening. What is the perception of Japanese media coverage of Fukushima thing? That's one week I just followed those things, how they felt about it.
What about the lessons being learned or not learned?
Now, why airline become safer? When any accident happen, they share this and black box, I just learned, I improved. But accident is one time, but nuclear is not one time. That's the reason I think Japan, as one of the advanced countries, has to be more open and try to share, asking any advice to help in contaminated water, make it transparent because of this hyper-connected world. It's very difficult to hide things, and if it's leaking out or tap, and then you are losing the trust and sort of credibility. That's my concern. That happens, but I think you have to share and learn. That's what happened. Airlines become much safer because they try to learn. So I can have a few suggestions I'd like to make because manufacturing is pretty good. So nuclear plants operate like manufacturing in Japan is very good because Hitachi and Mitsubishi and this and Westinghouse and this and that. Like airline industry, Airbus, Boeing, but how about the airline? They buy this thing, but their pilot and flight attendants, engineers, they have to become more like international standard because they have to communicate to fly into this thing, right? How they communicate has to be English. How to build these kind of operators and manufacturing thing. So I'm suggesting nuclear agency and this operator, why don't we send maybe 30 to US for 3 years, Japan, France, the same number come in. So they begin to share what is the better practice and how each country try to make nuclear plant operation and regulation much safer at their best. So then people become more trusted on the operators and regulators, just like airline. That's my suggestion. Nigeria and Uganda try to build a nuclear. Are you sure you can trust their thing? So if operators and manufacturers are reasonably more like global and just also human resources, and then you can get a more trust of this operation and regulation. That I have been sort of pushing this thing. That will be a part of the Japanese initiative. Once make a mistake, why don't we do that? And UK and Sweden and US and France, they are willing to do that, but somehow my message is not reaching out.
We have 7 people lined up, so if we can lean forward to get through everyone.
Sorry about that.
No, it's good. It's good content.
I'm agreeing that the conversation needs more transparency and
Right.
openness,
Yes.
and we do not have that level here, but we need it. That's not my question. You mentioned that accidents happen. This is true. There's a more colloquial way to say it, but yes, accidents happen. Given that, if it's an airline accident with 3 people on board, even if that includes Buddy Holly and all these other people, 3 people is not a disaster. 300 people is a disaster, 3,000 people is a bigger disaster. Can nuclear be scaled down so that when accidents happen, they're not as disastrous? That's my question. Question mark.
The answer to that is yes, and it's called the Small Modular Reactor Project.
Why aren't we doing it?
There are economic challenges with any design that you come up with. There are economic challenges. The marketplace, you know, while you can answer the safety question, you got to answer the marketplace question too, right? So there's marketplace issues with a smaller reactor. The economy is scale. There's a lot of cost in building a safe reactor. So you want more power. You want a higher power density. And you build the little ones, they cost a lot of money, and the power density is low. So, and the other problem you have with the small modular, I'll just go real quick, that they're designed that you start out to match the load. Let's say you need 10 megawatts, you build a 10 megawatt SMR. Well, they're usually in pods of about 10 reactors. So to be cost effective, you have to build the pods for all 10. Even when you build, so the marginal cost of the first one is enormous for the small. So there's economic problems with the small modular reactor. Now those people, if they were in the room, they would say, "Oh no, we got all kinds of, you know, we can save you money." But reality is there's an economic downside to small reactors.
there was obviously an economic downside when the big one went bad, but that's another issue. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. My question is about from the perspective of science.
The doctor can answer.
Okay. お腹じゃなくて、we what kind of say, you know, Fukushima, Fukushima was damaged because the core problem was here, backup generation problem, right? So, to solve the problem, once, nuclear fission or fusion, I'm sorry, continues to stop, the problem is the most important thing. So how to solve this problem or is the most important thing. So,
the question. What is the question? So I have to repeat your question.
Okay. Backup generator problem at the time, right?
Backup.
Generator.
Right. Duplicate.
To probably cool down.
Right.
Yeah, nuclear power plant.
Right.
And that is a core problem I hear.
Right.
So once I don't know, it's a mechanism, I don't know that, but fusion continues to cool down. So another method or something.
Yeah, another method. Yeah, that's a good question. But the basic question is, even after these things shut down, there's a lot of heat generated.
Right.
7% of the full power is generated. It's like, anybody ever use a stove? An oven stove. You got a pot of water on the stove, and you turn off the gas or the electricity, and that pot is still hot, right? It's still, that's called residual heat. So there's a lot of residual heat, and that residual heat has to be removed from a reactor immediately after shutdown, or bad things happen, like Daiichi. So you got to get that residual heat. Now, what your question is, isn't there a better way, right? Well, we're not going to change the physics, right? Because residual heat is residual heat, and we're not changing the physics. But what you'll see is with the newer reactors, they use much more what are called passive safety features.
Right.
They use thermal driving head, gravity, so they're much less mechanical systems. Like in Fukushima case, we needed the pumps, we needed the motors to run, we need all this stuff to run, all this equipment to run to cool the reactors. In the new designs, they are accumulators that just, when the pressure goes down in the reactor, the water flows in. Mr. Gravity works every time.
So
never stops.
We're not be damaged by unpredictable
Yeah, right. Well, you need, if you had a way to erase everything, you'd start out and you'd build a new reactor, a modern reactor.
Hello. Okay, my question's for both of y'all. Either one can answer the question. In regards to Casto, we believe as a pro-safety in nuclear bases.
You listened to me before, haven't you?
Yes, I do believe.
Because people always ask me, are you anti-nuclear or are you're pro-nuclear? I said, oh, I'm pro-safety. That's what I am.
So if we go back to pro-safety and I'm going to state the point that you said the check and balances between the power and the responsibility and the who takes the blame as well. So in regards to his presentation, where he says the speedy program was not put in place correctly, has the people been now in the other nuclear plants have been trained and acknowledging what kind of program is this to prevent this failure again to happen again?
No. What we are saying is there any clear sign of Japanese government and whoever responsible to learn this lesson and try to make collective action in a very transparent, also like understandable way to the public? Is that you haven't seen that? That's my question. So even before Fukushima, after Fukushima, it becomes sort of exposed. the way Japanese regulator have been
But
operating.
why,
So
when
after
they,
that
but
point,
when they interviewed the Tokyo University, they said, Professor, they acknowledged the program. They didn't know what Speedy was.
Right.
So why were they unaware of the program? Has that changed? That's my only one question. Has they been acknowledging the program or have they not?
I don't know, ask a professor at the University of Tokyo. Has to be a authority. So that's another problem too.
Okay. My questions is also, you have mentioned, Professor Casto, that there's a lack of checks and balances and needs to...
Well, I didn't say there was a lack, I just said there's an imbalance.
Yeah, that's an imbalance, but obviously it's not balanced. So, for instance, during the Fukushima, as my friend here said, there was a speedy, the measurement, how much radioactivity is in the atmosphere. So the Japanese government was using the speedy, while the American was using the SCAR. So how that would change from now on? How was the lessons learned? So you can't just say, hey, here 30 miles, 30 kilometers, it's fine. While you push the Americans and say, hey, not, 50 kilometers, it's fine. So that makes all the citizens very uncertain about the situation. How would that change from now on?
Yeah, and both, thanks for the question. And with regard to Speedy and Rascal, even the Americans after Fukushima made significant modifications to Rascal. You know, we thought we had it, understood it ourselves with Rascal.
Can you tell them what that is?
Rascal is a computer program that projects where the plume is going to be. And in reality, I mean, it's like a typhoon model and a hurricane model. These are models. These are computer models. These aren't reality. They're computer models. So you have to plan, and those are nice to have. And if you have them, they're great to have. But they are just a computer model, and it depends on your assumptions. Whatever assumption you put in will drive them. It's just math. You got to do the assumptions, and then math takes over, right? So they learned a lot of lessons about Speedy. We learned a lot of lessons about Rascal. There's cooperation around the international community with the IEA on new projection models. There are a lot of papers, academic papers written on it. So you know, the system is learning from it. That's all I can say. Is the system's learning from it. The NRC, the Americans learned a lot from it. Changed Rascal dramatically, pretty significantly. So the system's getting better.
Thank you very much. Thank you both very much. My question is actually in regards to former Prime Minister Khan. And I'm just curious, in your opinions, how do you think he performed after this disaster? And why do you think there's a differing opinion between, generalized, the Japanese opinion of his performance and like foreigners?
I'm going to give you my perspective, and Dr. Kurokawa is going to give you the right perspective. But one of the things I'll say, look, there's things that Khan did that I completely disagree with that were really bad. You know, the government intervention in these accidents, typically, regardless of whether it's Fukushima, Deepwater Horizon, Hurricane Sandy, oftentimes bad things happen when the politicians get involved. Because what happens is social justice trumps technical justice. Okay? So social justice will take over, and it will make the politicians demand actions on the technical people that don't make sense. It happened to Fukushima, it happened to Deepwater Horizon, it happened to Hurricane Sandy or Superstorm Sandy, and all these crises that happens, right? Because somebody's out there yelling to their politician that this is hurting me, right? The politician's going to respond, the politician goes to technical people. Fukushima could have been cooled down much sooner. Daiichi could have been cooled down much sooner had it not been for social justice. Okay? But that's the call, right? The government has the authority to say you're not going to put highly radioactive water in the ocean. That's their call. Okay, well that's going to cost another few months to get the reactor cooled down. If you want to make that decision, that's yours to make. You're going to be held accountable for it. The problem that Khan had, look, there's a lot I disagree with the Prime Minister, but here's something, but go back to the accident. Don't use hindsight. Go back to the accident and think about his situation. He had no trust in his government, right? He had no trust in his government. His son and his regulator was not effective. Academia was all over the place. Very deep out. Academia was all over the place. I could talk a long time about academia. You know, the industry had problems. The technical industry had problems. So where was he to turn? Everywhere he turned, right, it wasn't right. It wasn't good. Right? So the difference between Con and the United States was, in the United States, we have what are called resident inspectors. These are people who work and live at the plant. And they work for, I'll say this, but it's not literally true, but they work for the President of the United States. They're government employees who work for the federal government. So he can pick up, either the chairman of the NRC or the president can pick up the phone, or satellite phone, or whatever it is, and call to the site and have an independent source of facts given to them by somebody who works for them and is accountable to them. We didn't have that in Japan. Okay, so when Con calls, he calls the site, he gets the utility people, right? He's got nobody. Now, I'm not defending everything that the Prime Minister did. There's a lot of things I disagree in a big way. But I do understand that his flow of information was broken. Okay, Dr. Kurokawa.
No, that is the reason. The lesson we have to learn from this accident is in the global world and more than 400 nuclear plants in operation, and many want to build one. Regulator, operators, why not exchange regulator to be and operator to be in US, Japan to like France and Sweden, and same number come in. So they are trying to make it better. And then sharing all of a sudden how they operate. You guys have a two senior operator, senior regulator operator, and also like regulators on site, right? And they have any meeting they can go in without any notification. So that's the practice, and why not doing it? But in somehow Japan you cannot do it because you are stuck with the institution once you get in. Right? So why don't we exchange this, like airline manufacturing and operation are different, and so that nuclear will be the same issue. Operator and regulator sharing all the international licensing then, and then you go through it, and retraining system every 4 or 5 years, and make a more new approaches, and then you feel much safer, don't you think? And that is the sort of way to regain the trust of the people, where the nuclear operation and the regulator may be there. So that's my question. That is the proposal from these lessons, right? So that would be a very powerful message if you act. So that's my suggestion to Nuclear Safety Agency. I mean, a few times I'm suggesting this. So why don't you do that?
Yeah, I hope I can ask this question coherently. I'm a little nervous. I appreciate your involvement in the nuclear industry in the United States. And my question is for post-cleanup Fukushima area. And I'm coming at this from a personal perspective. I grew up within 12 miles of Rocky Flats atomic weapons plant. I was one of 5, I grew up in one of 5 communities that got our drinking water from 35% of the runoff plutonium. We are contaminated. And I got messages from the embassy to evacuate from Japan, to go back to Denver, and I thought, that's really ironic. Really? Because I live near Yamanashi, and so I think I was safer than I was actually growing up pre-infantile. That was opened 1953 to 1989, and it was hastily cleaned up completely with the Infinity Room buried in 2006. Watch YouTube, it's really fascinating. And to the east of us was a Rocky Mountain Arsenal. And that was 1942 where we made sarin gas and mustard and all kinds of fascinating stuff. We're right between those two things. So I'm alive, but a little odd. But okay, my question is now, it's been cleaned up and something positive has happened. We now have a Rocky Flats Stewardship Council. And this seemed like a really positive thing, and I met some of the people involved in this. And it's an organization where the government, the Environmental Protection Agency, and the citizens provide transparency to the people. And we can ask questions, and the secrecy of the Cold War is now a thing of the past. And for example, they're going to burn, they burn regularly, the grass, and it's necessary, but now they're going to, instead of burning and putting the airborne plutonium into the air, they're going to provide goats to eat the grass. So these kind of things. So my question is this kind of thing possible between the people of Namiecho and Fukushima? I would really like to see that. I would like to be involved in that. And I've been up there many times, and it seemed like a positive thing. So that's my question.
Yeah, this is a better question for Dr. Kurokawa. He can talk about the local. I was up there. I did a good tour up there in October. Was on the ground and went with the decontamination. And I'll tell you, I was never so happy to be stuck in a traffic jam in my life. You know, normally you hate brake lights. You go somewhere, and it was making me late for my train in Milwaukee. And because I've been up there so many times, and it's desolate, right? Well, now they got Highway 6 open, and they block off the roads inside it. But you can drive right, you know. So I'm leaving Tomioka or somewhere, and we're headed for Iwake to get to the train. And there's a traffic jam. And I'll tell you, I was really pleased at that traffic jam. It almost made me late, but I was really pleased. Because it means life is coming back. It's slowly but surely coming back.
Well, Denver's a beautiful place. I mean, people are forgetting about it. And it's like, move there, build houses right on the border, which was a buffer zone.
It's a little bit apples and oranges because you're talking about a nuclear weapons site, not a nuclear reactor. The plutonium issue is not an issue at Daiichi. So you're talking apples and oranges a little bit.
We have cesium and strontium.
Yeah, you got all kinds of bad stuff. It's worse. Okay, it's worse. I'll give you that. It's worse.
Thank you very much for that.
Up there in Fukushima, they just got plain old cesium. Okay, just run to the middle cesium. In the Rocky Flats, you got a whole host of stuff.
Okay,
right?
Thank you very much.
And this week on Monday, I'll be at Hanford. And you know how bad Hanford is.
So that's recorded.
I joke, I'm just joking. I don't mean to downplay what's going on for Fukushima, but it's not plutonium. It's not a weapons hazard.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
I'm going to tell everybody to watch that.
Well, thank you too for your very impressive remarks. And well, my question is, according to today Japan Times, the IAEA is concerned that the NRA of Japan is about to losing its independence. And after the level 7 accident and magnitude 9.2, it seems that we have society hasn't changed. Not so much. So I'm worried, how can Japan society change?
No, that is the precisely point. Our report is only a tip of iceberg, because this is a much big iceberg behind that mindset of many Japanese. So I don't know where you work. If you work for Mitsubishi Bank, you never go to Sumitomo or something. You are not allowed to do that.
Well, I'm afraid that I work for Sumitomo Bank.
Why don't you quit and ask Mitsubishi to hire you? So that's the thing. So that's the mindset. If you talk about all the technicality, you're missing the point, right? So that's the reason. So is this all right? Yeah.
Thank you.
So even like after 9/11, U.S. had a recommendation that nuclear could be a target of terrorist attack, so that they had a twice briefing to Japanese authorities. They have not taken any action. Why is that? So transparency is the very foundation of trust in this, current connected world. Thank you.
Thanks for the presentation. It's very informative. You mentioned about the regulatory entrapment.
Yeah.
And
the
capture, right? So obviously after the accident happened, the nuclear village, so-called, that reputation, the regulator, the operator, the media, the villages around the reactor, obviously that structure is shattered, credibility-wise. Do you think that it's going to be we're going to see a thawing of that mindset, of that collusion with their mindset.
Right. No, I think regulatory capture happen any country at any time. But we are addressing, is there any social structure or Japanese sort of norms which may be conducive to this collusion? And that is, one is nuclear energy production and distribution are monopolized by 9 utility companies. Monopoly always lead to some, collusion. That is the same. So in this time, I think maybe energy source be more diversified, localized, more renewable. For example, solar panels is an invention of Japanese through 1970s sort of energy crisis, but the utilization, the deployment of solar and renewable is the lowest in Japan, despite this earthquake and lack of this sort of energy sources, oil and other things. Why is it? So that's a question. And energy, nuclear energy, after Fukushima, that become a greater public knowledge. The collusion, all the things. So that's we are addressing. Is there any sort of social mindset unique to Japan, which may lead to this regulatory chapter? That's a monopoly and government, and then not much of a civil society sort of mindset. We are electing civil society, elected officials, and whenever you have some problem, you tend to go to Kasumigaseki. Why is it? They are serving us. I always tell them, you work, don't tell me what I do. I tell you what you do because I'm your civil servant. Is there any sort of mindset in majority of Japanese? That's my question. Right?
I'm a research chemist who teaches scientific English here in Japan, but I also, in the States, I worked as I ran a loss to an accident simulation lab, so I know a little bit about the situation here. For the past 2 years at 2 different universities, I've been running a class where the students do some research on earthquakes, Fukushima in particular, tsunami, and things that have happened with the accident and like SafeCast and other stuff. My question is, could the or should the fact that we had evidence of 18-foot tsunamis in the past have led TEPCO to build something higher than a 10-meter wall? Should that have also told them to put the backup generators up on the hill and not down where they could be flooded, just in case the thing, in case the wall that they do have is breached? And the switching gear, should that not have been not in the basement?
So once you recognize the sort of recommendation, for example, IAEA, why you are not implementing it? Because if this become a wider public knowledge, they are forced to do it. And this is a matter of money, and thus electric utility price may go up, but maybe public, I think, will accept that. So I think in 9th commission meeting, which is quite open to the public, I think on the video, online you can see that, we asked a question we invited that time of nuclear industry and safety agency, that METI, the active Hamano-san. So I asked a question to him, right? Now we have 50 nuclear plants in Japan. So why don't you list all 50 of them and then list when this was built and what is the model this is, and then what is the natural historical background over 1,000 years of that area. Why don't you make this happen, list it, and show this to the public? And then I think once you want to start from this one and that one, they are more sort of accepting such a procedure. But he couldn't answer. He said, all of a sudden, he never thought about it. So I asked him again. So that's, you can see that. So that's the way we did that. But if you do it, that becomes more reasonable. But to allow that happen, then you have to make a grid formation. So why not invest on the smart grid? Once you make a grid, there may be many gadgets of the apply all the things, and people become aware of how much electricity you're using. And after this 311, people start conserving energy. All of a sudden, if you put the solar panel thing, this is only a portion of this, but you can watch this. You're selling it, buying this, and all of a sudden you're just turning off TV here and that, and just avoiding this peak energy thing during hot summer or this or that. So people are just allowing them to choose what kind of thing you like. And many technology could evolve to make it energy more visible, and you can choose nuclear or this or that. And that will become possible if you create a smart grid. So why not invest on that? Monopoly always becomes rotten.
Your last question.
Hi, this is for Casto. We have a lot of assurances from you and people at TEPCO and stuff that safety culture has now been made a part of their philosophy. But in my observations of watching their drills and watching their reassurances of what they've done, they've changed tactics. In other words, I'm confident that what happened at Daiichi will not happen again at Kashiwazaki Kaiwa or any other nuclear plant in Japan, if you define that as a giant earthquake and tsunami. But if you define it as an unexpected occurrence with which they were not specifically prepared, they did not have written in their 3-ring binder and a plan for, are they really prepared to do something that's not expected for the next time?
Yeah, first let me clarify. I never said anything about safety culture. What I said was I watched the operators this week talk about crisis leadership training. I never said anything about safety.
They claim that they've actually taken on a better safety culture. Your opinion is that really true, or are they just?
Well, they just stood up. They just stood up inside the company a nuclear oversight organization that is sort of independent wing of TEPCO to overlook the operations. So that's something new that Kanagawa has done, to stand up this separate organization. And almost all the utilities in the United States have that organization as well.
But their paychecks still come from the organization.
But the head of the nuclear oversight organization typically reports to the CEO, not to the line organization. So they have various layers of this. I work on many what are called nuclear safety review boards, which is retired external people like me and old guys, old lady, but very experienced. See, I always get in trouble with that. The very experienced people that are retired from the industry, they serve on, because look, like I have been here, right? I'll tell you what I think, right? So I go to the CEO of the company and I say, look, I'm not happy with what's going on here, right? And we do that, and they listen to that. And so you have multiple layers of oversight within the system. And TEPCO's standing that up in their own system now, nuclear oversight, independent oversight, all those things.
Do you think it's enough to overcome the cultural truth in Japan, which Dr. Kurokawa presents, of, once you become part of the team and you're facing the crisis, you don't have an incentive to disagree or dissent. Well, you have an enormous pressure to go along.
And I haven't looked at we have programs in safety culture called the differing professional opinion, right? So you want people to constructively disagree. Constructive disagreement, not destructive disagreement, but constructive disagreement is what you're looking for. Now, I haven't looked at TEPCO's what's called the DPO, differing professional opinion program, so I don't know. I can't answer that part of the question. But I'm certain that they will stand up a DPO process if they haven't already, because that's pretty much standard international process is to have a differing a program, and also have someone that the employees can go to. What's the word I'm looking for? Independent.
Out of channel.
Yeah, out of channel. You'll have somebody. I forget. Employees concerned is what they call it. So you have an employees concern program that typically their offices are down the hall somewhere where nobody's paying any attention, and you go down there, or they could go directly to the regulator. and submit an allegation, a concern to the regulator directly, then either the regulator chooses to follow up on it depending on the severity, or they give it to the utility and say, follow up on this and let us know what you think about this, and then the regulator decides whether they want to do more follow-up. So you have all these layers for these systems, and if they're not set up, I know they will be set up. So that's built safety culture. You can't solve, you can't solve Japan, whatever cultural problems there are, broadly in the company. You got to worry about at this plant, in this company, what's the culture. Does that make sense?
These things exist. We know about this lack of this difficulty with dissent. What we need is a system that has enough pressure on that to overcome it and create a system that's more like more up to world standards.
Yeah, that's right. The IEA, and that's part of what the IEA's mission is to come in and look at that.
How about Japanese corporate? Have an external board who has the authority, and the board member will be accountable to stakeholders or shareholders.
Well, I agree with your intention.
That's
We need to get more exchange with other philosophies and other cultures to bring in a diffusion, a dilution of that very strong.
So I think Japan should take that opportunity, this lesson, to share and propose such a sort of international licensing and training program for operators and regulators. So any country build a nuclear, at least people in that country or the global committee feel much safer.
I think it should extend up and down much farther than most people do. Not just managers, not just executives, right down to the guys with a wrench in their hand.
Right, of course. Right.
And some of the guys with the wrench in their hands are Joe Moras here and Asby Brown, who are with the organization SafeCast, which is a citizens radiation monitoring group. And I just want to say that, one thing that's often left out in this picture is the public, citizens, and civil society, NGOs, community, and not just have this at a level of professional elites. So, thank you very much. I think you'll all agree that this was some very interesting content tonight, and I think our speakers